What my husband didn't know when he drained our $87,000 joint account for his girlfriend was that I'd discovered his secret offshore millions, information I kept to myself until the perfect moment at our divorce hearing, when everyone, including his mistress, was watching. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the exact moment when I realized something was terribly wrong. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in October when I tried to pay our quarterly property taxes online. The payment was rejected. Confused, I logged into our joint savings account, the one where we'd been saving for our dream vacation home for 7 years. The balance that should have read $87,432.99 now showed a shocking $212.45. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the transaction history. A series of large withdrawals over the past 3 weeks had systematically emptied our account, all authorized by Daniel, my husband of 11 years. There must be some mistake, I whispered to myself, reaching for my phone to call him. Daniel was the financial advisor everyone trusted, respected partner at Montgomery Wealth Management, regular guest speaker at finance conferences, and the man who managed the portfolios of half the executives in our city. His clients viewed him as the epitome of financial responsibility and ethical management. I had once seen him that way too. We had met when I was hired as the marketing director for Landmark National Bank. Our firms often collaborated on high-net-worth client events, and Daniel was always the one presenting investment strategies with such confidence and clarity that even the most skeptical clients would sign with him by the end of the evening. I fell for that same confidence, that assured competence that made everyone around him feel secure. "I'll always take care of everything," he promised the day we got married in a lavish ceremony at the Windsor Hotel. "Financial worries are for other couples, not us." For years, that seemed true. While I managed our day-to-day expenses from my substantial salary, Daniel handled all our investments, retirement accounts, and savings. "It's what I do professionally. Why wouldn't I do it for us?" he would say whenever I asked about the details, and I trusted him completely. "Hey, this isn't a good time," he answered my call in a hushed tone, the sounds of an airport announcement echoing in the background. "I'm heading into a meeting with clients." "Daniel, there's almost nothing left in our joint savings." $87,000 is gone. "Did you make some investments I don't know about?" The pause was brief but telling. "Oh, that. Yes, it's a short-term opportunity that came up suddenly. Incredible returns, but the window was closing. I'll explain everything tonight." He hung up before I could ask another question. Something in his voice didn't sound right. A pitch of nervousness I'd never heard from my always confident husband. That night, Daniel didn't come home. A text at 10 p.m. claimed his client meeting had run late, and he was staying at a hotel near the client's office in Springfield. Springfield was a 3-hour drive away. It was plausible, but something felt wrong. Couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I found myself sitting in Daniel's home office, staring at his closed laptop. In 11 years of marriage, I had never once felt the need to invade his privacy. We had built our relationship on trust and transparency, or so I thought. Our framed wedding photo stared at me from his desk. Daniel looking immaculate in his tailored tuxedo, me beaming in my designer gown, both of us radiant with promises of forever. Now I was about to cross a line I never thought I would. The password to his computer was our wedding anniversary, something that now felt like bitter irony. His emails loaded, and I told myself I was just looking for information about investments or business decisions that might explain the missing money. What I found instead was an email thread with a woman named Vanessa. The most recent message contained a confirmation for 2 first-class tickets to Bali. The dates showed they had departed that very morning, explaining the airport noise I'd heard during our call. The cost of the tickets, $16,400. My hands shook. as I scrolled through hundreds of messages dating back 8 months. Romantic exchanges. Photos of a stunning blonde woman posing in designer clothes and jewelry, all recently purchased, according to the loving notes Daniel had attached to each. Image, weekend getaways, plans for their future together. "You deserve everything, my love," he had written just days ago. "Soon we won't have to hide anymore. Everything is coming together exactly as planned." Each photo was like a physical blow. Vanessa modeling a $12,000 Cartier bracelet in a luxury hotel suite. Daniel and Vanessa on a yacht in the Hamptons, a weekend when he'd told me he was at a financial conference in Chicago. A receipt for a $4,500 Chanel handbag with a note. A small token for my queen. The money from our joint account hadn't gone into investments. It had gone into building a lavish lifestyle with another woman. I kept scrolling, moving from stunned heartbreak to cold fury. Then something else in his emails caught my attention. References to accounts and investments I'd never heard of. Discussions of secure transfers and offshore arrangements. As the marketing director for a major bank, I understood enough about finance to recognize the language of hidden assets. There were references to an entity called Artemis Holdings and transactions through banks in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Documented transfers showing amounts far larger than anything in our declared joint assets. In one email to his private banker at Helvetic Trust, Daniel mentioned keeping the full 8 figures secure and untraceable. 8 figures. Over $10 million that I knew nothing about. By morning, I had documented everything and contacted a divorce attorney, but I didn't reveal all that I had discovered. Something in Daniel's confident deception, in his certainty that he had outmaneuvered me, made me decide to be strategic. If he wanted to play games with our finances, he would soon learn he had severely underestimated his wife. My attorney, Rebecca Winters, was known for handling high-profile divorces with both discretion and ruthless efficiency. Her corner office in the city's most prestigious law firm overlooked the same financial district where Daniel worked, a fact I found darkly satisfying. "He's hiding assets," she stated matter-of-factly after reviewing what I had shown her. "But proving it will be challenging. Men in financial services know how to cover their tracks. Then we'll need to be smarter than him," I replied, sliding across the table a USB drive containing screenshots of the emails about Artemis Holdings. "I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with before we make our move." Rebecca nodded, slowly, a slight smile forming as she reviewed the documents. "This is an excellent start. I know just the forensic accountant for this job, former IRS investigator who specializes in uncovering hidden offshore accounts. But this investigation will take time and resources." "I have some savings he doesn't know about," I told her. "And all the time in the world to do this right. Daniel thinks he's the financial expert in this relationship. Let him keep thinking that while we follow every digital breadcrumb he's left behind." "You're remarkably composed," Rebecca observed, studying me carefully. "I've been underestimated my entire career," I replied. "Men in finance look at a woman in marketing and see someone who couldn't possibly understand their complex world." Daniel made the same mistake. He forgot that before marketing, I spent 3 years in Landmark's compliance department, reviewing suspicious transaction reports and working with federal investigators on financial fraud cases. While Daniel was enjoying Bali with Vanessa, blissfully unaware that I had discovered his betrayal, I began meticulously building my case. The man who thought he had cleverly deceived his wife was about to learn a painful lesson in consequences. Daniel returned from Bali 5 days later, tanned and seemingly carefree. He texted that he was coming home, as if he'd just been away on a routine business trip. When he walked through our front door that evening, I was sitting calmly in the living room reviewing quarterly reports for a bank client. "Hey, sorry about the radio silence," he said casually, setting down his expensive luggage I'd never seen before. That client situation in Springfield got complicated. Had to fly to their headquarters for emergency meetings. I looked up from my laptop, careful to keep my expression neutral. Springfield has headquarters in Bali now? That's quite the corporate expansion. For just a moment, his confident facade cracked. A flicker of panic crossed his face before he regained his composure. What are you talking about? Nothing. I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. How was your trip? The weather must have been beautiful this time of year in Indonesia. He set his jaw, calculating his next move. This was the Daniel I'd never seen before, the strategic manipulator hiding behind the loving husband mask. Have you been spying on me? His tone shifted from confused to accusatory in an instant. Is that really the conversation you want to have right now? I asked, my voice steady. Instead of explaining why you emptied our joint savings account to take your girlfriend to Bali? His strategy changed again. The anger dissolved into a practiced look of remorse. He sat down heavily on the sofa across from me, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. I've been meaning to talk to you about this, he said, his voice softening. Things haven't been right between us for a long time, Emma. You're always working, always distracted. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It was the classic script. Blame the victim. Rewrite history. According to Daniel's revisionist tale, our marriage had been failing for years. I was emotionally distant. We had grown apart. Vanessa had started as just a friend, a shoulder to cry on, until their connection became something he couldn't ignore. I was going to tell you everything when I got back, he insisted. I've just been trying to figure out the right way to do it. By emptying our joint account first? I asked, maintaining my composure. He had the audacity to look offended. That money is technically mine. Most of it came from my year-end bonus. Our bonus, I corrected, that we agreed to save for our future, for the lake house we've been planning for 3 years. Plans change, he said dismissively. I needed to sort some things out, figure out what I want. And what do you want, Daniel? He hesitated just long enough for me to know he was crafting his words carefully. I think we should take some time apart. Figure out if this marriage is what we both still want. I almost laughed at his transparent attempt to control the narrative. He wasn't asking for a divorce, not yet. He wanted to keep his options open while he assessed which path would be most financially advantageous. I think that's a good idea, I agreed, surprising him. I've already packed some of your things. You can stay at that condo you bought last year, the one you didn't think I knew about. His eyes widened slightly. How did you— The property tax bill came to our house, I said simply. Addressed to Artemis Holdings. Interesting company name. Greek goddess of the hunt, right? For the second time that evening, panic flashed across his face. He quickly masked it with a nervous laugh. It's just an investment property, a completely above-board business venture. Of course, I nodded. I'm sure your accountant has all the proper documentation for the tax authorities. Daniel stood up abruptly. I'll get the rest of my things tomorrow. I think we both need space to process this situation. Take all the space you need, I replied. As he turned to leave, I added, Oh, and Daniel, I've frozen the credit cards, all of them. I think we should keep our finances separate while we process. His back stiffened, but he said nothing as he grabbed his new luggage and walked out the door. As soon as his car pulled away, I called Rebecca. He took the bait, I told her. Mentioned Artemis Holdings himself without realizing it. Perfect, she replied. Our forensic team has already found connections between that shell company and 3 others. They all trace back to accounts in Grand Cayman and Zurich. We're getting closer to the full picture. The next morning, I received the expected call from Daniel's attorney, Howard Greenberg, a shark known for representing wealthy men in high-asset divorces. His reputation for hiding marital assets was legendary in legal circles. Mrs. Montgomery, my client has instructed me to handle all further communications regarding your separation. Greenberg's smooth voice oozed false sympathy. "I understand this is a difficult time, but we hope to make this process as painless as possible." "That's very considerate," I replied. "My attorney will be in touch." "Your attorney?" He sounded surprised that I'd moved so quickly. "Well, yes, of course. Though we're hoping to resolve this amicably. Mr. Montgomery is prepared to be quite generous in the settlement." I bit back a laugh. "I look forward to hearing his definition of generous." Over the next 6 weeks, Daniel's true character revealed itself fully. His initial settlement offer through Greenberg was insulting. $350,000 total from a marriage that had lasted over a decade, with no alimony and no claim to his premarital business interests. According to their financial disclosure, Daniel's total assets were just under $2 million, a fraction of what I now knew he actually possessed. Meanwhile, Rebecca's team was working diligently, following financial trails around the globe. The forensic accountant she'd hired, former IRS investigator Marshall Chen, was systematically uncovering Daniel's elaborate network of hidden assets. "He's actually quite sloppy," Marshall told us during a strategy meeting in Rebecca's office. "Arrogant men often are. They're so convinced of their own brilliance that they don't bother covering all their tracks." On the digital screen before us, Marshall displayed a complex web of companies and accounts. Artemis Holdings is just the tip of the iceberg. It owns partial interest in 3 other shell companies: Poseidon Ventures, Olympic Investments, and Zeus Capital. "He really committed to the Greek mythology theme," I noted dryly. "Each of these entities holds different assets," Marshall continued. "Real estate in 5 states and 3 countries, investment portfolios, art collections, even a yacht registered in Panama. The total value we've uncovered so far exceeds $22 million. Rebecca turned to me. "And none of this was disclosed in his financial affidavit for the divorce proceedings." "Which constitutes perjury," Marshall added. "Not to mention potential tax fraud, depending on how these assets have been reported to the IRS. I studied the intricate financial map on the screen. "Can we definitively prove these assets belong to Daniel?" Marshall smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "That's where he made his critical mistake. The operating agreements for all 4 shell companies list him as the beneficial owner. He apparently didn't think anyone would ever find the connection between his personal accounts and these entities. The emails you discovered mentioning Artemis gave us the thread to pull," Rebecca explained. "Once we had that name, Marshall was able to follow the money trail." Outside the office windows, rain streaked down the glass, mirroring the cold determination I felt. "So, what's our next move?" Rebecca leaned forward. "We have 2 options. We could present this evidence to Greenberg and push for a more favorable settlement, one that actually reflects the true marital estate. Or," I asked, already knowing I wouldn't be satisfied with option 1, "or we let them continue with their current strategy of concealment and deception, building our case for the court. When they present their fraudulent financial affidavits, under oath at the temporary hearing next month, we reveal everything." "Including the affair?" I asked. "The affair is actually less important legally than the financial fraud," Rebecca explained. "Michigan is a no-fault divorce state, but the hidden assets? That's where the court will hammer him. Judges hate being lied to about finances. It goes to character and credibility." I considered the options carefully. A private settlement would be faster, cleaner. But it would also allow Daniel to avoid real consequences for his actions. He would pay me off and continue his life with minimal disruption, probably marrying Vanessa and telling everyone he'd given me a generous settlement because he's such a good guy. I want the hearing, I decided. Let him dig his own grave deeper. Over the next 3 weeks, Daniel's attorney sent increasingly aggressive emails to Rebecca, pushing for mediation and a quick resolution. Each time she politely declined, citing the need for complete financial transparency, before any meaningful settlement discussions could occur. Daniel himself tried different tactics. First came angry texts accusing me of dragging things out, for spite. When that didn't work, he switched to nostalgia, sending late-night messages reminiscing about our early days together. Finally, he resorted to financial pressure, canceling insurance policies and attempting to remove me from our household accounts. Little did he know, I had already secured copies of all our important financial records and opened new accounts in my name only. The money he didn't know about, my separate savings and the emergency fund my grandmother had advised me to maintain when I first got married, gave me the freedom to wait for the perfect moment. Always keep something for yourself. My grandmother had told me, marriage is beautiful, but independence is essential. Her wisdom, born from living through her own husband's betrayal in a time when women had fewer options, had become my salvation. As the hearing date approached, I maintained my outward composure at work and in public, but privately, the emotional toll was mounting. Each night I would return to our half-empty house, the spaces where Daniel's things had been creating physical reminders of the life that had been built on lies. One evening, I found myself standing in his closet, staring at the few remaining suits he hadn't yet collected. The faint scent of his cologne still lingered in the fabric. For a moment, grief overtook me. Not for the loss of Daniel, but for the loss of the future I thought we were building together. The lake house that would never be. The family we had started discussing in recent years. But in that same moment, looking at the empty spaces in his closet, I remembered the photos of Vanessa wearing jewelry bought with our savings. I recalled the contemptuous dismissal in Daniel's voice when he claimed plans change, and thought of the methodical way he had drained our accounts. My resolve hardened. The hearing was 2 weeks away, and Daniel Montgomery was about to discover that underestimating me would be the most expensive mistake of his life. The temporary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in early December, just as the first snow of the season blanketed the city. I had taken the entire week off work, using vacation days I'd accumulated over years of rarely taking time away from my responsibilities at the bank. You need to be mentally prepared, Rebecca advised during our final strategy session. Greenberg will try to rattle you. He'll paint you as vindictive, possibly unstable. His goal will be to make you emotional, to undermine your credibility. I understand, I said, my hands steady as I reviewed the thick binder of evidence we had compiled. I've faced down hostile boardrooms and skeptical executives my entire career. Howard Greenberg doesn't intimidate me. Rebecca smiled. That's exactly the attitude you need to maintain. Remember, the judge will be watching not just what you say, but how you carry yourself. Composure speaks volumes. What Rebecca didn't know was that I had been rehearsing for this moment every night for weeks. Standing before my bathroom mirror, I practiced keeping my expression neutral as I recited the details of Daniel's betrayal. I trained myself to speak about the hidden millions without a hint of anger or bitterness in my voice. The facts alone were damning. They didn't need emotional embellishment. During the day, I meticulously organized documentation that Marshall had uncovered. Bank statements, property records, corporate filings, and transfer receipts were arranged chronologically in color-coded folders. The evidence told a clear story of systematic deception spanning years, not months. 3 days before the hearing, Daniel made his most desperate attempt yet to settle. A text message arrived late in the evening. Emma, please call me. This doesn't need to get ugly. I'm willing to revise my offer. Substantially. I forwarded the message to Rebecca without responding to him. He's getting nervous, she texted back. Someone must have tipped him off that we're not as in the dark as he hoped. The day before the hearing, I visited my grandmother at her assisted living facility. At 87, her body was fragile, but her mind remained sharp as ever. I hadn't told her the full extent of Daniel's deception, not wanting to burden her, but she had intuited much from our brief conversations over the past weeks. "Tomorrow's the day?" she asked as we sat in the facility's garden, wrapped in blankets, against the December chill. "Yes," I replied. "The initial hearing." She took my hand in hers, her paper-thin skin cool against my palm. "You know, when your grandfather left me for his secretary in 1963, the judge awarded me the house and $100 a month in alimony. My friend said I was lucky." She chuckled bitterly. "That was justice for women in those days." "Things are different now," I assured her. "Because women like you made them different," she said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "You don't just have options, Emma. You have power. Use it." That night, I laid out my outfit for the hearing, a charcoal gray suit I'd had custom tailored. Last month, crisp white blouse and subtle pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. Professional, understated, but impeccable. The armor of a woman who knew her worth. Sleep eluded me despite my preparation. I kept checking my phone, reviewing the digital copies of key documents, and mentally rehearsing my responses to potential questions. At 5 a.m., I gave up on rest and prepared for the day with methodical precision. The courthouse was an imposing neoclassical building in the heart of downtown. I arrived an hour early, meeting Rebecca in a small conference room she had reserved for last-minute preparations. "Any questions before we go in?" she asked as we reviewed our strategy one final time. "Just one," I said. "Will Vanessa be there?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Unlikely. These proceedings aren't generally public spectacles. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," I replied, though in truth, I had hoped to see the woman face to face, not out of jealousy or anger, but to understand what had made her a willing participant in destroying my marriage. Had Daniel fed her the same lies he was now telling the court? Did she know about the money he had hidden away? As we gathered our materials and prepared to enter the courtroom, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it, then looked up with surprise. "It seems you might get your wish after all," she said. "My assistant just spotted Daniel arriving. Vanessa is with him." A cold calm settled over me. "Good. Let's make sure they have front-row seats for what's about to happen." The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in an unflattering pallor. Daniel and Howard Greenberg were already seated at one table, heads bent in conversation. And there, in the first row of public seating, sat Vanessa. She was younger than she appeared in the photos, probably early 30s to my 42. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and she wore a designer dress that I recognized from one of the receipts in Daniel's emails, a $2,400 purchase from 2 months ago. Our eyes met briefly as I walked past. I smiled politely, noting the confusion on her face. She had clearly expected hatred or jealousy, not the serene confidence I projected. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Eleanor Winters entered the courtroom. Judge Winters was in her 60s, with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency and particular intolerance for financial dishonesty in divorce cases. Rebecca had been pleased when we learned she would be presiding. "Montgomery versus Montgomery, temporary orders hearing," the clerk announced, and we were underway. Greenberg presented their side first, painting Daniel as a hardworking financial expert whose wife was unreasonably prolonging the divorce process. He emphasized Daniel's generous settlement offer and insinuated that I was holding out for emotional reasons rather than practical ones. "Your Honor, my client has already offered Mrs. Montgomery a settlement of $400,000, which represents a fair division of the couple's joint assets," Greenberg stated smoothly. Despite this reasonable proposal, Mrs. Montgomery has refused to even engage in mediation. Judge Winters turned to Rebecca. "Counselor, why has your client declined to pursue mediation at this stage?" Rebecca stood, her expression professional, but determined. "Your Honor, we have declined mediation because we have reason to believe Mr. Montgomery has not provided a full and accurate financial disclosure as required by law." Greenberg immediately objected. Your Honor, these are baseless accusations. My client has submitted a complete financial affidavit under oath. Has he indeed? Rebecca replied calmly. If I may, Your Honor, I would like to present evidence that directly contradicts Mr. Montgomery's sworn financial disclosure. Judge Winters nodded. You may proceed. What followed was a masterclass in methodical demolition. Rebecca presented the evidence we had gathered piece by piece, building an irrefutable case of financial deception. She displayed bank records showing transfers from Daniel's personal accounts to Artemis Holdings, then revealed the connection between Artemis and the other shell companies. Property records for luxury condominiums, vacation homes, and commercial. Real estate appeared on the courtroom screen, each title linked to one of Daniel's shell companies. Investment portfolios worth millions, a yacht in Panama, art collections stored in climate-controlled vaults in 3 countries. I watched Daniel's face as his hidden empire was exposed. The confidence drained from his expression, replaced by a sickly pallor as he whispered frantically to Greenberg. From my peripheral vision, I could see Vanessa's shocked expression as she learned the true extent of Daniel's wealth he had apparently not shared with her despite his lavish gifts. Your Honor, Rebecca continued, Mr. Montgomery's sworn financial affidavit claimed total assets of approximately $1.8 million. The documentation we've presented today reveals assets exceeding $22 million, none of which were disclosed to the court or to Mrs. Montgomery during the marriage. Judge Winters' expression had grown increasingly stern as the evidence mounted. She turned to Daniel and Greenberg. Counselor, would you care to explain this discrepancy? Greenberg, visibly flustered, requested a brief recess to confer with his client. Judge Winters granted 15 minutes, during which Daniel and his attorney huddled in urgent conversation while occasionally glancing in my direction. When court resumed, Greenberg attempted damage control. Your Honor, there appears to be some confusion regarding certain business entities that my client is associated with. These are complex corporate structures that— Mr. Greenberg, Judge Winters interrupted. Are you suggesting that your client inadvertently failed to disclose over $20 million in assets on his sworn financial affidavit? Your Honor, these are business interests, not personal assets, Greenberg attempted. Yet the beneficial ownership documents clearly list Mr. Montgomery personally, Judge Winters noted, reviewing the evidence. And the funds used to establish these entities came directly from accounts jointly held with Mrs. Montgomery. It was at this moment that Rebecca implemented the final part of our strategy. Your Honor, if I may, there is one additional matter that bears directly on this issue. With the court's permission, she introduced the emails I had discovered, the ones showing Daniel's systematic draining of our joint account to fund his relationship with Vanessa. The expenditures for jewelry, clothing, luxury vacations, and the first-class tickets to Bali appeared in a damning timeline alongside withdrawals from our savings. As you can see, Your Honor, Rebecca explained, Mr. Montgomery didn't just hide assets from Mrs. Montgomery. He actively diverted their joint funds to support an extramarital relationship while simultaneously concealing substantial wealth through an elaborate network of shell companies. From the public seating area came a small gasp. Vanessa had apparently not realized that her luxury lifestyle had been funded with money stolen from my future. Judge Winters had heard enough. She addressed Daniel directly, her voice sharp with disappointment and anger. Mr. Montgomery, in my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a blatant attempt to defraud both this court and a spouse. Your actions demonstrate not just dishonesty, but calculated deception that may well constitute criminal behavior. She turned to Rebecca. Counsel, are you planning to refer this matter to the district attorney's office? We are still considering our options, Your Honor, Rebecca replied. I could see Daniel's face drain of what little color remained. The threat of criminal charges, something that would destroy his career in financial services permanently, had clearly not entered his calculations. Judge Winters issued temporary orders that froze all assets connected to Daniel, including the shell companies, pending final resolution of the divorce. She appointed a receiver to take control of the offshore accounts, ordered Daniel to submit a complete and accurate financial affidavit within 5 days, and scheduled a show-cause hearing to determine if he should be held in contempt of court for his previous false statements. As we stood to leave, I caught Vanessa's eye once more. The admiration and wonder in her expression had been replaced by confusion and betrayal. She was beginning to realize that the man who had promised her everything had been lying to everyone in his life, likely including her. Outside the courtroom, Rebecca turned to me with a rare smile. "That couldn't have gone better if we'd scripted it ourselves." Judge Winters is furious with him, and rightfully so. "What happens next?" I asked, feeling strangely hollow despite our overwhelming victory. The adrenaline that had carried me through the hearing was ebbing, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "Now," Rebecca said, "we wait for him to come to us. And he will. Men like Daniel always do when they realize they're cornered." She was right. That evening, as I sat in my quiet kitchen nursing a glass of wine and finally allowing myself to process the emotions of the day, my phone lit up with a message from Daniel. "We need to talk. No lawyers. Just us. Please, Emma." I didn't reply. The time for private conversations had long passed. Whatever Daniel wanted to say, he could say it through proper legal channels. After all, I had learned from the master himself that patience and strategic timing were everything, and my moment was just beginning. In the 3 days following the Rice temporary hearing, Daniel sent 17 text messages and called 11 times. I maintained my silence, forwarding each communication to Rebecca without response. His messages evolved from demanding to pleading, the tone shifting as his desperation grew. "We need to talk outside of court," one read. "This doesn't have to get uglier than it already is." Another, sent at 2 a.m. "Emma, please, you've made your point. Let's be reasonable adults about this." The final one, most revealing. "They're talking about criminal charges. My career will be over. Is that what you want?" On the 4th day, Greenberg contacted Rebecca with a settlement offer that acknowledged the previously hidden assets and proposed a 60-40 split in Daniel's favor. "He still doesn't get it," Rebecca said during our call to discuss the offer. "He thinks this is just a negotiation now, that we'll counter with 50-50 and settle somewhere in between." "What would you advise?" I asked, though I already knew my answer. Legally speaking, given the circumstances, we could push for much more than 50-50. Michigan courts take dim views of financial misconduct, and Judge Winters made her feelings quite clear. With the evidence of hidden assets and misappropriation of joint funds, we could reasonably seek 60-40 in your favor, possibly more. I considered this. "And the criminal implications?" Rebecca's voice turned grave. "That's a separate matter. If we refer this to the district attorney, Daniel could face charges for perjury at minimum. Given the amount involved and the sophisticated nature of the deception, there could be fraud charges as well. A conviction would almost certainly mean prison time and the end of his career in financial services. The power I held was sobering. With a single decision, I could destroy the life Daniel had built, just as he had destroyed our marriage. The temptation for retribution burned within me, a desire to make him suffer as I had suffered. Yet something held me back from embracing vengeance completely. "Let me think about it," I told Rebecca. "There's something I need to do first." That evening, I drove to the address I had found in Daniel's emails, the luxury downtown apartment he had purchased for his rendezvous with Vanessa. The doorman recognized me immediately. Daniel had clearly shown him photos during their affair. "Mrs. Montgomery," he said, his discomfort evident. "I'm not sure I should. Please tell Ms. Collins that Emma Montgomery would like to speak with her," I said calmly. "If she refuses, I'll leave immediately. No drama, I promise." He hesitated, then made the call. To my mild surprise, Vanessa agreed to see me. The elevator ride to the penthouse level gave me time to compose my thoughts, to remind myself why I had come. Vanessa opened the door wearing casual loungewear, her face bare of makeup, looking much younger and more vulnerable than in her polished photos. The apartment behind her was immaculate, all modern furnishings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I recognized several art pieces that had been purchased with funds from our joint account. "This is unexpected," she said, stepping aside to let me enter. "I imagine so," I replied, taking in the space that had been furnished with money from my joint account with Daniel. "Thank you for seeing me." An awkward silence stretched between us as we stood in the entryway, two women connected by the same deceitful man. "Would you like some wine?" she finally offered, gesturing toward the living room. "I feel like we both could use it." I nodded, following her into the sleek space. The coffee table held scattered papers, printouts of news articles about Daniel's case. The financial world was small, and word of his court appearance had spread quickly through professional circles. Vanessa handed me a glass of red wine and sat across from me, tucking her legs beneath her. "So, is this where you tell me what a horrible person I am?" "No," I said simply. "That's not why I'm here." She looked surprised. "Then why are you here?" I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. "I wanted to understand. And I thought you might want answers too." Vanessa's composed expression cracked slightly. "You think I don't know what happened? I was there in the courtroom. I heard everything." "You heard what Daniel did," I acknowledged. "But I doubt you heard the whole truth from him before that." She looked away, her fingers tightening around her wineglass. "He told me you were separated, that you had agreed to divorce months ago but were dragging things out to punish him." She paused, then added with a bitter laugh, "He said you were emotionally unstable and vindictive, that you resented his success." It was exactly what I had suspected. "When did you meet him?" "At a charity gala last February. He was a speaker, so confident, so articulate about financial empowerment." A bitter smile twisted her lips. "Ironic, right? He told me you were a career-obsessed workaholic who had emotionally abandoned the marriage years ago." The familiar script again, blaming me for his choices. "And the money? The gifts? The trips?" Vanessa's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "He said he was wealthy from his investment career, that he could afford to be generous. I didn't know he was taking your money. You have to believe that." Looking at her now, young, clearly intelligent but devastated by Daniel's betrayal, I felt an unexpected kinship rather than animosity. She too had been manipulated, albeit in a different way. "I believe you," I said. "Daniel is very convincing when he wants something." She wiped away a tear. "He proposed to me in Bali. Did you know that? Said once his divorce was finalized, we could start our life together. The whole time he was hiding. Millions even from me." She laughed bitterly. "God, I feel so stupid." "Don't," I told her firmly. "I was married to him for 11 years and never saw the truth. Professional investors trusted him with their life savings. You're not stupid, Vanessa. He's just that good at deception." She reached for her phone, scrolling through messages before turning the screen toward me. "Look at these. After the hearing, he told me everything would be fine, that you were bluffing about criminal charges, that his lawyers would handle it all." The messages showed a very different Daniel than the one who had been desperately texting me, confident, dismissive of the court proceedings, assuring Vanessa that this was just a temporary setback. In one particularly revealing exchange, he boasted that he still had millions tucked away where no one will ever find them. "May I?" I asked, gesturing to her phone. When she nodded, I forwarded the incriminating messages to myself. "He's still lying to you," I said gently. "Still manipulating. There are no additional hidden millions. We've found everything, and the criminal implications are very real. We talked for over an hour, filling in the gaps in each other's understanding of Daniel's double life. She showed me photos of other gifts he had purchased, trips they had taken, all funded with money from our joint accounts or his hidden assets. I shared details about our marriage that contradicted the stories he had told her about me. "Last month, he bought me this," she said, disappearing into the bedroom and returning with a stunning diamond bracelet. Said it was to celebrate our future together. Cost over $15,000, apparently. I recognized it immediately from the receipt in his emails. He used our joint account for that, money we had saved for a lake house. Her eyes widened. "The house on Silver Lake? The one with the boat dock? You know about the lake house?" He showed me pictures, said it was his personal investment property that he was planning to surprise me with after we were married. The audacity was breathtaking. Daniel had actually shown her photos of the property we had dreamed about together, claiming it as his own future gift to her. As I prepared to leave, Vanessa hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "What are you going to do now, about the criminal charges?" I paused at the door. "I haven't decided yet." "He's terrified, you know," she said. "He came here last night, drunk, talking about how his life is over if this goes to the district attorney, how he could end up in prison." She met my eyes directly. "I'm not defending him. He deserves consequences. I thought you should know where his head is. Has he admitted any wrongdoing to you? Expressed any genuine remorse?" She shook, her head slowly. "No. Even drunk, he was focused on how this affects him, his career, his reputation." I nodded, thanking her for her candor. As I drove home, my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. The conversation with Vanessa had filled in the final pieces of the puzzle, confirming what I had begun to suspect. Daniel's deception went deeper than financial fraud or infidelity. It was a fundamental character flaw, a willingness to harm others to get what he wanted, accompanied by a complete lack of genuine remorse. The next morning, I forwarded Vanessa's messages to Rebecca along with my decision. "Tell Greenberg we reject their 60-40 offer," I instructed. "I want 50% of all assets, including those previously hidden, plus reimbursement for all funds spent on the affair, the jewelry, travel, and that apartment downtown." "That's entirely reasonable," Rebecca agreed. "And regarding potential criminal charges, I had considered this carefully. I don't want to pursue criminal charges immediately." "Emma," Rebecca said cautiously, "are you sure? What he did was serious. There could be other victims beyond you, clients whose funds he might have mishandled." "I'm not protecting him," I clarified. "But I'm not interested in revenge either. Here's what I want instead. Daniel must agree to a full forensic audit of all his professional dealings, with the results reported to the relevant financial regulatory bodies. If they find evidence of crimes against his clients, that's for them to pursue. Additionally, he must surrender his financial advisory licenses and never work in investment management again." Rebecca was silent for a moment. "That's actually quite brilliant. It protects the public without turning this into a criminal matter, but will he agree?" "He will, if the alternative is prison," I said confidently. "Daniel values his freedom above all else." "And add one more condition. I want a formal acknowledgement of his financial misconduct to be part of the public record, not hidden in sealed divorce proceedings." Rebecca presented our terms to Greenberg that afternoon. The response came within hours, a counter-proposal that accepted most of our terms, but attempted to preserve Daniel's professional licenses and keep the acknowledgement of misconduct private. "He's still bargaining," Rebecca noted during our update call. "Still thinks he can charm his way out of the worst consequences. Tell Greenberg the licenses are non-negotiable, and the public acknowledgement stays," I replied. Daniel built his fortune on lies and deception. He shouldn't be allowed to continue managing other people's money. And I won't let him rewrite history to protect his ego. 3 tense days followed as messages flew between attorneys. Finally, Greenberg capitulated. Daniel would accept our terms. In full, equal division of all assets, reimbursement for affair expenses, surrender of his licenses, a full forensic audit, and a public acknowledgement of his financial misconduct. "We've won," Rebecca announced. "The settlement agreement is being drafted now. Judge Winters will likely approve it given the circumstances. You'll walk away with approximately $11 million, plus the house if you want it." A strange sense of emptiness accompanied this news. Winning didn't feel like I had imagined it would. What happens to Daniel now? Professionally, he's finished in financial services. The regulatory findings will become public record, so even if he tried to start over elsewhere, his reputation is ruined. Personally, that's not our concern anymore. That evening, as I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, my phone lit up with a message from Daniel, his first direct communication in days. "You've destroyed everything I've worked for. I hope you're satisfied." No apology, no acknowledgement of his role in creating this situation. Just blame, as always. I didn't respond, but I saved the message as one final reminder of who Daniel Montgomery truly was. An hour later, a different message arrived, from Vanessa. "He just told me the settlement terms, said you'd ruined his life. I reminded him that he ruined his own life. We're done. Thank you for showing me the truth before I made an even bigger mistake." I wished her well, genuinely hoping she would find happiness with someone worthy of her trust. As for me, the future stretched before me, uncertain but full of possibilities. That had been unimaginable just months ago. The next day, a courier delivered the settlement agreement for my review before the final hearing. Hundreds of pages documenting the dissolution of my marriage and the division of assets that Daniel had fought so desperately to hide. As I signed my name to the document, I felt not triumph, but release. The severing of the final ties to a man who had betrayed not just my trust, but his own integrity. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. One final confrontation, and then this chapter of my life would close. I was ready, not just for the end, but for the new beginning that waited beyond it. The day of the final hearing arrived with an unexpected sense of calm. The turmoil of the past months, the shock of discovery, the meticulous investigation, the strategic planning, had finally led to this moment of resolution. As I dressed in a tailored navy suit, I felt none of the anxiety that had accompanied the temporary hearing. Whatever happened today, I had already reclaimed my power. Rebecca met me at the courthouse steps, immaculate as always in a charcoal gray pantsuit, her briefcase filled with the settlement agreement and supporting documentation. "Ready?" she asked, studying my face. "More than ready," I replied. "Let's finish this." The courtroom was more crowded than I expected. Word had spread through legal and financial circles about the Montgomery case, a cautionary tale of hidden assets and sophisticated financial deception that had captivated the professional community. I recognized several of Daniel's colleagues in the gallery, along with financial reporters from local business publications. This was no longer just my private divorce. It had become a public reckoning. Daniel and Greenberg were already seated at their table when we entered. Daniel looked diminished somehow, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. When our eyes met briefly, I saw something I'd never witnessed. In him before, fear. Judge Winters entered, and the proceedings began with the formal presentation of our settlement agreement. Greenberg spoke first, his usual confident demeanor subdued as he confirmed his client's acceptance of all terms. "Your Honor, while my client disputes certain characterizations of his actions, He has agreed to the proposed settlement in the interest of bringing this matter to a swift resolution. Judge Winters's expression made it clear she wasn't impressed by this attempt to salvage Daniel's dignity. Mr. Greenberg, let's be precise in our language. Your client committed perjury in this court by deliberately concealing assets in excess of $20 million. He has agreed to this settlement because the alternative would likely include criminal prosecution. Is that a more accurate summary? Greenberg's jaw tightened. Yes, Your Honor. Rebecca then presented our side, methodically outlining the settlement terms: equal division of all assets, including those previously hidden, reimbursement for funds spent on the affair, Daniel's surrender of his financial licenses, and the required forensic audit of his professional dealings. Additionally, Your Honor, Rebecca continued, the settlement includes Mr. Montgomery's acknowledgement of financial misconduct, which will be part of the public record. Judge Winters turned to Daniel. Mr. Montgomery, please stand. Daniel rose. Slowly, his normally commanding presence diminished. Do you understand and accept all terms of this settlement agreement? Judge Winters asked. Yes, Your Honor, he replied, his voice barely audible. And do you acknowledge that you knowingly concealed marital assets and provided false information under oath to this court? Daniel hesitated, looking toward Greenberg, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Yes, Your Honor, he finally said. For the record, Judge Winters continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. I want to be clear that this court finds your conduct reprehensible. You have abused the trust of your spouse, violated your fiduciary responsibilities, and attempted to defraud this court. That you are not facing criminal charges is solely due to your wife's decision not to pursue them. Do you understand how fortunate you are in that regard? Daniel's shoulders slumped further. Yes, Your Honor. Very well. This court approves the settlement agreement as presented. The divorce is granted. Mr. Montgomery, you will comply with all terms, including the surrender of your licenses and full cooperation with the forensic audit. Failure to do so will result in immediate referral to the district attorney's office. Are there any questions? Both attorneys confirmed there were. None. Then we are adjourned. Judge Winters struck her gavel with finality, stood, and exited the courtroom. It was over. 11 years of marriage dissolved in a 15-minute hearing. The gallery began to empty, whispers and murmurs following Daniel as he hurried out with Greenberg, avoiding eye contact with his former colleagues. Rebecca and I remained seated, completing the necessary paperwork for filing. Congratulations, she said quietly. It's not every day I see justice served so thoroughly. I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Thank you for everything, Rebecca. I couldn't have navigated this without you. As we gathered our materials to leave, a court officer approached with an envelope. Mrs. Montgomery? Mr. Montgomery asked me to give you this. Inside was a handwritten note on his personal stationery. We need to talk, privately. Please meet me at Riverside Park, our bench, 2 WAM today. There's something you don't know. I showed the note to Rebecca, who frowned. You don't owe him any private conversations, Emma. Whatever he wants to say can go through proper channels. I know, I agreed. But I'm curious what last manipulation he's planning to attempt. Rebecca looked concerned. If you go, don't go alone. I can send my assistant or I'll be fine, I assured her. It's a public park in broad daylight, and honestly, I think I need this final conversation for my own closure. After leaving the courthouse, I had lunch at a quiet cafe, using the time to collect my thoughts before meeting Daniel. Part of me wondered if I should ignore his request entirely, but something in his note had sparked my curiosity. What could he possibly think I didn't know at this point? Riverside Park had been our special place in the early years of our marriage. We'd spent countless Sunday afternoons on our bench overlooking the water, planning our future, dreaming about the life we would build together. It seemed fitting that this would be the setting for our final conversation. I arrived precisely at 2:00 to find Daniel already there, staring out at the river. He looked up as I approached, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Perhaps he hadn't expected me to come. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as I sat on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining a deliberate distance between us. "You said there was something I don't know," I replied. "I'm listening." Daniel took a deep breath, his gaze returning to the water. "The money is gone." I frowned, confused. "What money?" "The $11 million you think you're getting from the settlement. Most of it doesn't exist anymore." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Explain." After the temporary hearing, when I realized how thoroughly you'd uncovered everything, I made some desperate decisions. I took what liquidity I could access and made a series of high-risk investments trying to recoup enough to offer you a better settlement. I stared at him, disbelieving. "You gambled with assets that were already under court supervision?" He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "They failed, catastrophically. The offshore accounts are nearly empty now. The properties are still there, but they're heavily leveraged. The art collection was sold last week." "That's contempt of court," I said, my mind racing. "Criminal contempt." "I know." For the first time, genuine fear showed in his expression. "When the forensic audit reveals the transactions, I'll be going to prison. That's what I wanted to tell you. The settlement you fought so hard for is worth maybe 1/10 of what you think." I should have been furious. I should have immediately called Rebecca to report this new deception. Instead, I found myself laughing, a genuine, spontaneous laugh that seemed to startle Daniel as much as it surprised me. "What's funny about this?" he asked, bewildered. "You are," I replied, my laughter subsiding. "Even now, at the very end, you're still trying to manipulate me, to make me feel like I've lost. Emma, I'm serious. The money is... I don't believe..." "You, Daniel," I interrupted calmly. "Not anymore." I pulled out my phone and showed him an email I'd received that morning from Marshall Chen, the forensic accountant. "Rebecca had Marshall monitoring all your accounts since the temporary hearing, even the ones you thought we didn't know about. Every transaction has been tracked. Every attempt to move or hide assets has been documented. If you actually did what you're claiming, we already know about it." His expression shifted from fear to confusion. "Then why aren't you angry, panicking?" "Because I don't think you did it. This is just another manipulation, your last desperate attempt to make me feel like I've failed." I stood up, ready to end this final conversation. "But here's what. You never understood, Daniel. This was never about the money for me." "Then what was it about?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Justice, truth, and making sure you could never do to anyone else what you did to me." I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "I did love you, you know, in the beginning." I looked back, at him, sitting alone on the bench where we had once shared our dreams. "I believe you did, but love without honesty isn't really love at all, is it?" As I walked away, my phone buzzed with a message from Marshall. "All accounts reconciled and secured. No unusual transactions detected. Settlement assets intact. Just as I had suspected. One final lie from a man who seemed incapable of truth." I deleted Daniel's contact information from my phone, symbolically severing the last connection to the man who had once been the center of my world. The drive home took me past Montgomery Wealth Management's gleaming office tower. By this time, tomorrow, Daniel's name would be removed from the building directory, his prestigious corner office reassigned, his client relationships transferred to other advisors. The empire he had built on deception was crumbling, just as our marriage had. At home, I changed into comfortable clothes and sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset. My phone rang, Rebecca calling for an update. "How did it go with Daniel?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "He tried to convince me he'd lost most of the settlement money on risky investments after the temporary hearing," I explained. claimed the accounts were nearly empty. What? Rebecca sounded alarmed. That would be a lie, I finished for her. I already confirmed with Marshall that all accounts are intact. It was just one final attempt to make me feel like I'd lost. Rebecca's relief was audible. I shouldn't be surprised, but somehow, I still am. The man truly can't help himself. We discussed the final steps in the process, transferring assets, changing titles, establishing my financial independence completely separate from Daniel. The mechanics of dismantling a shared life. After we hung up, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Daniel and me in happier times. Our wedding day, vacations, dinner parties with friends. The images now seemed like scenes from someone else's life, a story I had once believed was mine but now recognized as largely fiction. I looked up at the darkening sky, feeling a strange sense of gratitude amid the loss. I had discovered my own strength through this ordeal, a resilience I might never have known without being tested so completely. The future I had planned with Daniel was gone, but in its place lay infinite possibilities of my own making. My phone buzzed with an unexpected message from my grandmother. Saw the news about your divorce settlement. So proud of you, my girl. Remember what I always told you about women and money? I smiled, typing back. Independence is essential. Exactly, she replied. Now come visit this weekend and tell me everything these old ears are too delicate to read in the financial papers. As night fell completely, I made a decision. The lake house Daniel and I had dreamed about, the one he had shown to Vanessa as if it were already his, I would buy it myself, not as a bitter reminder of what was lost, but as a symbol of my new beginning, a place built not on deception but on the solid foundation of truth I had fought so hard to uncover. Tomorrow would bring the practical matters of rebuilding my life. Tonight was for acknowledging both the pain and the freedom that come with endings. Daniel had emptied our joint account thinking it would leave me desperate and powerless. Instead, it had set in motion the events that would ultimately reveal not just his deception, but my own capacity for strategic patience and strength. Indeed, the end, the most valuable asset recovered wasn't measured in dollars. It was the reclamation of my own story, one that was still being written, with chapters yet to come that Daniel would never be part of. And for the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited to turn the page. 1 year later, I stood on the deck of my newly completed lake house, watching the sunset paint the water in brilliant oranges and purples. The property that had once been just a dream shared with Daniel, the future home he had shown to Vanessa while claiming it as his own, was now a reality, but one I had built entirely on my terms. The journey to this moment had been anything but straightforward. After the divorce was finalized and the assets divided, the financial freedom I'd secured should have felt like an immediate victory. Instead, I found myself adrift, legally vindicated, but emotionally hollow. 11 years of marriage couldn't be neatly sorted like the financial holdings we had divided. On a brisk morning 3 months after the final hearing, I received an unexpected call from Rebecca. "Emma, have you seen the news?" Her voice held an unusual tension. "No, what's happening?" I was at my temporary apartment, reviewing job offers that had started coming in once word spread about my departure from the bank. Daniel's been arrested. The SEC investigation uncovered irregularities far beyond what we found. They're alleging he misappropriated client funds to cover personal trading losses. I sat down, suddenly lightheaded. His clients, are they going to lose everything? Most should be protected by insurance, but the reputational damage is catastrophic. Every major financial publication is running the story. After we hung up, I resisted the urge to follow the coverage obsessively. Daniel's new downfall wasn't my victory, nor was it my responsibility. Yet later that evening, I found myself staring at his booking photo in the financial press. His face strained, eyes haunted, the confident mask completely stripped away. What struck me wasn't satisfaction or even vindication, but a profound sense of waste. So much talent, intelligence, and opportunity squandered by greed and deception. I closed the browser and made a decision that would ultimately shape my new beginning. 2 weeks later, I walked into the offices of the Women's Financial Empowerment Network, a struggling nonprofit that offered financial literacy workshops to underserved communities. Their director, Sophia Martinez, had been trying to expand their services, but lacked funding and connections within the financial industry. "What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Sinclair?" Sophia asked after I outlined my ideas. "A partnership," I explained. "I have capital from my settlement, industry connections, and unfortunately, first-hand experience with financial deception. You have the infrastructure, community trust, and mission. Together, we could build something truly impactful." Within 6 months, our partnership had transformed the organization. We established the Phoenix Foundation, named for the mythical bird that rises from the ashes. Our mission was twofold: empowering women through financial education and supporting those recovering from financial abuse. As our programs expanded, I started receiving invitations to speak at industry events. At first I hesitated, knowing the whispers would follow. Daniel Montgomery's ex-wife, the woman who had exposed his hidden millions. But I quickly realized my personal story could serve a greater purpose. Financial literacy isn't just about understanding investments or balancing checkbooks, I told a packed auditorium at a women's leadership conference. It's about recognizing that financial knowledge is power. Power to make choices, power to leave harmful situations, power to build the life you want on your own terms. These speeches attracted both media attention and funding. Corporate sponsors, initially drawn by the notoriety of my divorce story, stayed for the substantive work we were doing. Within a year, the Phoenix Foundation was operating in 12 cities, reaching thousands of women. On a rainy Tuesday 9 months after Daniel's arrest, I received a letter with a prison return address. For hours, I left it unopened on my kitchen counter, unsure if I wanted to invite his words back into my life. Eventually, curiosity won out. "Emma," the letter began in the familiar handwriting that once signed birthday cards and anniversary notes. "I don't expect forgiveness, nor am I writing to justify what I did. I'm facing 3 to 5 years here, and the mandatory counseling has forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself." He continued for several pages, detailing his therapy insights and prison reflections. The tone was different from anything I'd heard from him before. No manipulation, no blame shifting, just raw acknowledgement of his failures. His final paragraph struck me most deeply. "I see your work with the Phoenix Foundation in the financial journals they let us read here. You've created something meaningful from the wreckage I caused. It's a form of alchemy I never mastered, turning betrayal into purpose. I won't contact you again, but I wanted you to know that the woman I underestimated is now someone I genuinely admire." I didn't respond to the letter, but I didn't throw it away either. It marked in its way the final closure of that chapter of my life. Daniel was acknowledging not just his wrongdoing, but my strength, something he had never truly seen during our marriage. 6 weeks later, I received another unexpected communication. Vanessa had emailed to tell me she had been accepted to a psychology doctoral program focusing on financial betrayal trauma. Our conversations helped me understand that my experience with Daniel wasn't just about being deceived by a man I loved, she wrote. It was about being manipulated by someone who weaponized financial information. I want to help others recognize and recover from similar experiences. We met for coffee the following week, no longer connected by pain and betrayal, but by shared purpose. Vanessa eventually joined the Phoenix Foundation as our research director, bringing academic rigor to our program development and becoming one of my closest friends in the process. The lake house was completed on the 1-year anniversary of my divorce. Unlike the grandiose mansion Daniel and I had originally planned, I designed a warm, welcoming retreat with space for foundation workshops and women's empowerment retreats. The first group of attendees, 20 women recovering from financial abuse, arrived the weekend after the final touches were completed. As I welcomed them on the deck that first evening, I saw in their faces the same fear and uncertainty I had. Felt standing in my kitchen that October morning, staring at an emptied bank account. But I also recognized the flicker of hope that comes with realizing you're not alone. I know what it feels like to discover your financial security was an illusion, I told them as we gathered around a fire overlooking the lake. To realize someone you trusted completely betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way. But I also know what it feels like to rebuild from that betrayal. Not just financially, but emotionally. Over the weekend, these women shared their stories. A stay-at-home mother whose husband had secretly mortgaged their home to cover gambling debts. A successful executive whose partner had been siphoning money from their joint accounts for years. A recent college graduate whose boyfriend had taken out credit cards in her name, destroying her credit score before she'd even started her career. Each story echoed elements of my own experience, yet each woman's path forward would be uniquely hers. Our role at the Phoenix Foundation wasn't to prescribe solutions, but to provide tools, knowledge, and community that would empower them to reclaim their financial agency. On the final morning of the retreat, I woke before dawn and walked down to the dock. The lake was perfectly still, the water reflecting the lightening sky like a mirror. In that peaceful moment, I realized how far I had come from the woman who had once defined herself primarily as Daniel Montgomery's wife. The emptied account, that had initially seemed like a devastating loss, had ultimately been my liberation. It had forced me to see the truth of my marriage and, more importantly, to discover strengths within myself I might never have recognized otherwise. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Morning. NPR interview confirmed for next week. They want to feature the Foundation's work in their series on financial literacy." Our message was spreading, our impact growing. What had begun as one woman's response to betrayal was becoming a movement that would help thousands. As the sun broke over the horizon, casting long golden rays across the water, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for what had happened, but for what I had built from it. Daniel had emptied our account thinking it would leave me desperate and dependent. Instead, it had revealed my capacity for strategic patience, for transforming pain into purpose, for building something far more valuable than what had been taken. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to control me through money, Daniel had inadvertently set me free. His betrayal had become the catalyst for my most authentic life. One built on helping others find the same freedom I now cherished. Behind me, I heard the retreat participants beginning to gather on the deck for morning coffee. Women who had arrived as strangers united by similar wounds were now leaving as a supportive community, each stronger for having shared their stories. I turned away from the sunrise to join them, ready to continue the work of transformation, theirs and my own. The account Daniel had emptied had contained our shared dreams for the future. The life I was building now contained something far more valuable: purpose, authenticity, and the quiet confidence that comes from having faced betrayal and emerged, not just surviving, but truly thriving. Some endings, I had learned, are actually beginnings in disguise. And sometimes what appears to be loss becomes the doorway to something far more precious than what was taken. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.